On the evening of 10 of August 1902, at Crossways on Ocean Drive, Newport, Rhode Island, the last guests arrived for what invitations describe as an intimate dinner for a mysterious Prince del Drago. In the great Colonial Revival Hall, white paneling, polished floors, pink rambler roses threaded with tiny electric lights, Mamie Fish pauses just before stepping into view. She tugs once at the wrist of her long white glove, making sure the kid leather is perfectly smooth against her skin. Footmen hurry past with champagne flutes. In the drawing room beyond, a rustle of silk and low murmur of expectation rise under gaslight and shaded bulbs. A New York Society column has recently called her a fun maker, a phrase she repeats to herself like both compliment and command. Behind her, in a side room, a monkey in a tiny evening suit fidgets, waiting to be introduced as the prince. The flowers, the gloves, the joke, all are immaculate. What they cost her is not mentioned in any report. On 8th June 1853, in Castleton, Staten Island, Marion Graves Anthon was born into a respectable New York legal family. Her father, William Henry Anthon, is a lawyer and state assemblyman. Her grandfather, John Anthon, is a prominent jurist whose legal scholarship influences generations of American attorneys. The Anthon name carries weight in New York's professional circles, though not the glittering social prominence of the Astors or Vanderbilts. The family occupies a comfortable middle ground, respected, educated, prosperous enough to maintain appearances, but not wealthy enough to be careless. Later, biographical sketches note that her childhood includes time in Gramercy Park, a neighborhood of brick townhouses, trees and iron railings, solidly comfortable, not yet extravagant. The park itself, enclosed by a locked fence to which only surrounding residents hold keys, becomes a metaphor for the circumscribed world of respectable New York. Accessible only to those who belong, its boundaries clearly marked. The Anthon House, a 4-story brownstone with high stoops typical of the neighborhood, faces the park's southern edge, its parlor windows offering views of the carefully tended greenery. Inside, the house follows the spatial conventions of mid-century New York: formal parlors on the second floor for receiving callers, family dining room on the third floor, bedrooms above, servants' quarters in the attic and basement. The furnishings reflect professional success rather than inherited wealth. Good but not ostentatious furniture, adequate but not extravagant draperies, family portraits suggesting continuity but not aristocratic lineage. On Sundays, parishioners remember the Anthon girls standing in stiff new dresses, Marion surreptitiously pulling at the tight fingers of her gloves as hymns drone under stained glass light. The church, a Gothic revival structure with high vaulted ceilings and carved wooden pews, demands perfect posture and perfect silence. The gloves, made of thin kid leather dyed to match each dress, pinch at the knuckles after the first hour. The discomfort is minor but persistent, a small physical reminder of the larger constraints that govern every aspect of a girl's life. The etiquette books of mid-19th century New York describe a girl's role plainly: deference, neat handwriting, modest conversation, and eventually a suitable match. These volumes, found in parlors throughout Gramercy Park, specify the exact depth of a curtsy for different occasions, the proper wording for calling cards, and the acceptable topics for young ladies' conversation. Reading, arithmetic, and geography are taught, but always with the understanding that a girl's real education lies in learning to please, to anticipate others' needs, to suppress her own preferences, to make herself ornamental rather than instrumental. Marion learns these rules not from formal instruction, but through observation and correction, each misstep quietly noted and later addressed. Her mother, a woman whose own youth has taught her the penalties for deviation, maintains vigilant supervision. A laugh too loud, a question too direct, an opinion too forcefully expressed, each draws gentle rebuke, the correction delivered in private, but the lesson internalized permanently. The future fun maker is first shaped by these quieter expectations. The card calls, the careful visiting lists kept by her mother, Mrs. Anthon maintains a leather-bound book recording every social obligation, calls made and received, invitations extended and accepted, small slights that must be remembered and avenged through strategic omission. Marion watches her mother at this task, noting how a name crossed from the list can signal the end of a family's social standing. The book becomes a text more important than any she studies at school, teaching the mechanics of social power in its most refined form. The neighborhood itself reinforces these lessons. Gramercy Park operates as a village within the city, its residents knowing one another's business, judging one another's choices, maintaining standards through collective surveillance disguised as neighborliness. Who calls on whom, who appears at which church, whose daughter receives which attention, all circulate as information that shapes reputations and determines futures. Years later, when reporters call her irresistible despite a lack of conventional beauty, they will be describing a personality forged from this early mixture of security and constraint. The stability of Staten Island would not survive her father's death, but the memory of those gloves never left her. In 1875, Marion's father died. Town and Country's reconstruction of her life notes that the family is left without funds, retreating from Gramercy respectability to Astoria, then known as a manufacturing district with rank smells from nearby factories. The specifics of William Henry Anthon's financial collapse remain unclear. In surviving records, whether through bad investments, unpaid debts, or simply the absence of savings, but the consequences are immediate and devastating. The comfortable life Marion has known dissolves within months of his death. The transition from Gramercy Park to Astoria represents more than a change of address. It marks a fall from one class to another, from professional respectability to genteel poverty. The family must sell the brownstone, dispose of furniture and art accumulated over decades, and relocate to rented rooms in a neighborhood they would previously have avoided. The psychological shock rivals the material hardship, the recognition that their security was always more fragile than it appeared, dependent on one man's continued health and income. In boarding house rooms that look onto smokestacks instead of trees, the air is thicker, the gloves more worn. The family's reduced circumstances require economies that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Fewer servants, plainer dress, careful mending of garments that would previously have been discarded. Marion, now 22, finds herself in a position familiar to many women of her class and era, possessing all the training for a life of leisure, but lacking the means to sustain it. Her education in French and piano, her knowledge of proper etiquette, her familiarity with society's rituals, all these accomplishments, once valuable assets in the marriage market, now seem cruel mockeries of her actual circumstances. The boarding house itself represents a specific rung on New York's social ladder, occupied by families in temporary difficulty, widows with small incomes, unmarried women of good family but no fortune. The residents maintain careful distinctions from working-class lodgings while acknowledging their distance from proper homes. Meals are taken communally, privacy is limited, and the constant proximity to strangers erodes the sense of domestic sanctuary that characterized the Gramercy Park house. For a young woman of her class, paid work is largely unthinkable. The socially acceptable path is clear. Teaching might be possible for a genteel woman in reduced circumstances, but it would mark a permanent fall in status. Serving as a companion to a wealthier woman offers another option, equally limiting. The marriage market, brutal in its calculations, offers the only real escape route for a woman with breeding, but no fortune. Marion understands this calculus with painful clarity. Her value lies not in her abilities or intelligence, but in her unmarried status and respectable connections. It fell to Mamie to marry well enough, one modern historian writes, to pull her mother, sister, and brother out of poverty. The phrasing, while contemporary, captures the transactional nature of what follows. Marion understands that her education in deportment, her knowledge of proper forms, her connections to prominent families, all these assets must now be converted into a different kind of security. The marriage she makes will determine not just her own future, but her family's survival. On 1 June 1876, at the Church of the Transfiguration in Manhattan, she married Stuyvesant Fish, banker and future president of the Illinois Central Railroad, son of statesman Hamilton Fish. Contemporary reports emphasize his lineage and fortune. Their wedding is less fairy tale than strategic rescue. The church, known colloquially as the little church around the corner, is favored for society weddings despite its modest size and Anglo-Catholic practices. Its location on East 29th Street, slightly removed from the most fashionable districts, suits a wedding that aims for respectability rather than ostentation. Stuyvesant Fish, 35, at the time of the marriage, brings to the union impeccable credentials. Grandson of Nicholas Fish, a Revolutionary War officer, son of Hamilton Fish, who served as Secretary of State under President Grant, and himself a rising figure in railroad finance. For Marion, the match represents not just financial security, but restoration of the social position her father's death had threatened. The wedding itself, while proper, lacks the elaborate preparations that would attend a bride from a wealthier family. The trousseau is modest, the reception small, the honeymoon brief, yet the rescue is real. Stuyvesant's wealth, derived from both inheritance and his own success in banking, provides immediately for Marion's mother and siblings. The boarding house is abandoned, proper lodging secured, debts quietly settled. The relief must be profound, though no surviving letter records Marion's private feelings about this transaction. The girl who had learned to hide discomfort inside tight gloves now watched a new role slip over her life just as neatly: Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish. After the wedding, Stuyvesant's parents present the couple with a house on Gramercy Park, returning Mamie to the neighborhood of her happier childhood, this time as mistress rather than daughter. The house, a 4-story brownstone with high stoops and tall parlor windows, occupies one of the coveted positions facing the private park. The gift, while generous, also signals expectation. The young couple will maintain appropriate standards, entertain suitably, and uphold the Fish family's reputation. The symbolism cannot escape Marion. She has returned to the world from which she fell, but only through marriage, only through surrender of her own name. The house itself requires transformation from its previous incarnation as bachelor quarters for one of Stuyvesant's brothers. Walls must be repainted, carpets replaced, furniture selected to reflect a married couple's status, rather than a single man's temporary residence. Marion throws herself into this work, discovering in the process both a talent for domestic management and a pleasure in exercising control over her environment. Each choice, the color of dining room walls, the style of parlor furniture, the arrangement of the second-floor drawing room, becomes an assertion of identity and taste. Household manuals from the 1870s describe the duties of a young married woman: supervising servants, managing accounts, receiving callers, writing notes. The practical realities of running a household of this size, coordinating cook, housekeeper, parlor maid, and lady's maid, require organizational skills and diplomatic finesse. With limited formal education, she later joked she was barely literate, a remark repeated in modern profiles. Mamie leans instead on quick observation and sharper wit. The joke about literacy, while surely exaggerated, hints at real gaps in her education. Women of her generation and class typically received instruction in accomplishments rather than academics. Enough French to read a menu, enough music to play parlor pieces, enough drawing to sketch a landscape. Reading and writing were taught, but advanced literature, mathematics, and classical languages remain male preserves. Marion's intelligence, considerable by all accounts, found expression through social rather than scholarly channels. She reads people with extraordinary accuracy, detecting pretension, insecurity, or ambition in a glance or a phrase. The servant staff, inherited from the house's previous occupant, requires careful management. The cook, an Irish woman with decades of experience, initially resents taking orders from a young mistress barely out of her 20s. The parlor maid, accustomed to minimal supervision, must be taught the standards Marion expects. The lady's maid, hired specifically for Marion, becomes her closest domestic ally, learning her preferences and protecting her privacy. These relationships, invisible in public but crucial to daily life, demand constant attention and occasional confrontation. Society pages begin to mention Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish at dinners and charity committees. Her husband's rise at the Illinois Central Railroad and the family's connection to Hamilton Fish give her impeccable credentials. The Illinois Central, one of America's major railroads, connects Chicago to New Orleans, and Stuyvesant's role in managing this vast enterprise brings both wealth and prominence. The Fish name appears regularly in newspapers, usually in conjunction with political developments or business successes. Yet the pattern is familiar: afternoon calls, long dinners, stiff conversation. The social season follows a predictable rhythm: winter in New York, spring travel, summer in Newport or the Hudson Valley, autumn back in the city. Each phase has its rituals, its obligations, its carefully calibrated performances. At the writing desk, she signs Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish at the bottom of yet another thank you note, flexes her fingers, and slowly pulls off her gloves, one finger at a time. The kid leather has left faint marks on her skin, temporary indentations that fade within minutes but return each time she dresses for an occasion. The routine of these early married years establishes patterns that will persist: the careful management of social obligations, the strategic deployment of invitations, the use of hospitality as a form of power. But something else is building beneath the surface: a restlessness, perhaps, or a recognition that the rules binding her might also be bent. She has been saved by this marriage, yes, but also trapped by it, her freedom to act limited by the very conventions that now protect her. The next time she adjusted those gloves, it would be to tear up the rules of the world that had just admitted her. By 1887, with Stuyvesant firmly established as president of the Illinois Central Railroad, Mamie's social education accelerated. His promotion to the presidency of one of America's major railroads brings not just increased wealth, but heightened visibility. The Illinois Central's business extends across multiple states, involving negotiations with politicians, financiers, and other railroad magnates. As the president's wife, Mamie finds herself entertaining increasingly important guests and attending events where her performance reflects on her husband's professional standing. The railroad itself, stretching from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, represents industrial America's reach and ambition. Stuyvesant's management of this enterprise involves constant travel, lengthy board meetings, and complex financial maneuvering. His absences leave Mamie largely autonomous in managing their social life, a responsibility that becomes both burden and opportunity. She must represent the family at events he cannot attend, maintain relationships with wives of business partners, and navigate the complex politics of New York society without his direct guidance. Unlike some contemporaries, she does not attend a European finishing school. Instead, her training comes through practice, observing Mrs. Astor's receptions, reading etiquette columns, listening to servants gossip about who arrived late or wore the wrong jewels. The lack of formal finishing school education, which might have seemed a disadvantage, actually proves liberating. She has not been drilled in rigid continental protocols, but instead develops her own style through observation and experimentation. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor's receptions, held at her mansion at 5th Avenue and 34th Street, set the standard for New York society. These events follow strict protocols: receiving lines where guests are announced, designated areas for conversation, specific times for departure. Mamie attends these gatherings, noting every detail: the height of floral arrangements, the spacing of chairs, the timing of refreshments, the subtle signals by which Mrs. Astor indicates favor or displeasure. She watches how the great hostess uses silence as much as speech, how a slight nod can elevate a guest, while a cold glance can devastate. The physical layout of Mrs. Astor's house becomes a text to study. The progression from entrance hall to drawing room to ballroom, each space designed to display wealth while controlling movement. The famous ballroom, supposedly capable of holding 400 guests, thus the origin of the 400, operates as both a dance floor and sorting mechanism. Those invited to dance occupy the center. Those relegated to the margins understand their lesser status. Even the arrangement of furniture communicates hierarchy. the best chairs positioned for Mrs. Astor and her favorites, lesser seats for those of middling importance, standing room for those granted mere admission. Accounts from later biographers emphasize that she could barely read but possessed an acute ear for tone and insult. This characterization, while extreme, points to a real quality. Her intelligence operates primarily through social rather than textual channels. She reads people with extraordinary accuracy, detecting pretension, insecurity, or ambition in a glance or a phrase. This skill, far more valuable in her world than classical learning, becomes her primary tool. Where others might analyze a text, she analyzes a room. Where others parse Latin grammar, she parses the grammar of gesture and glance. At her writing table in Gramercy Park, she dictates invitations and has them copied in a neat hand, then checks each envelope herself. The ritual of correspondence becomes another way of drawing lines. Who is in? Who is excluded? Her secretary, a young woman hired specifically for her elegant penmanship, transcribes Mamie's words onto heavy cream stationery embossed with the Fish family crest. Each invitation is an act of power, conferring or withholding the social recognition that matters more than money in this world. The process of creating a guest list becomes an exercise in strategy, balancing obligations with preferences, mixing old families with new money, ensuring enough interesting personalities to prevent boredom while avoiding combinations that might produce conflict. She learns to anticipate who will spark with who must be kept apart, which placements at table will facilitate useful conversations, and which will create awkward silences. When a dull lecturer leaves her board at a charity event, a famous quip is recorded. After he asks if the audience found his talk enlightening, she replies, "After hearing you talk for an hour," her tone expressing utter disbelief at their supposed enthusiasm. The remark, reported in society columns, establishes her reputation for caustic wit while also demonstrating a crucial talent, the ability to devastate with a question rather than an accusation. The technique will serve her well. Questions allow for deniability, for the suggestion that perhaps she was genuinely curious rather than deliberately cruel. Mastering the codes, she discovers that the sharpest instrument in society is not diamonds or pedigree, but timing. In the 1890s, the Fishes commissioned Stanford White to design a new house at 25 East 78th Street near Madison Avenue, a limestone and brick mansion that placed them firmly among Upper Fifth Avenue society. The choice of White as architect signals ambition. He is the era's most fashionable designer, responsible for Madison Square Garden, numerous Newport cottages, and the palatial homes of New York's wealthiest families. His fees are substantial, his vision uncompromising, his results magnificent. To hire White is to announce that one has both the wealth to afford the best and the taste to recognize it. The house, completed in the mid-1890s, rises 4 stories with a limestone facade in the Italian Renaissance style. Photographs show a grand staircase sweeping up from the entrance hall, high-ceiling salons with gilded moldings and silk wall coverings, and a dining room suited to formal dinners for 40 guests. The ballroom, added in a later expansion, features parquet floors, floor-to-ceiling mirrors, and crystal chandeliers imported from Venice. Every detail reflects White's signature combination of European grandeur and American scale. The entrance hall, paved in marble and rising 2 stories, creates immediate impact. Visitors ascending the front steps enter a space designed to overwhelm. Columns supporting a vaulted ceiling, a staircase with elaborate ironwork balustrades, walls covered in damask or hand-painted panels. The effect announces wealth and taste before a single word of greeting is spoken. From the hall, a series of interconnected reception rooms unfolds: morning room, drawing room, library, each decorated in a different style, but unified by White's orchestration. Yet Mamie's use of these rooms diverges from tradition. Drawing on later reminiscences and social histories, writers note that she pioneered extremely rapid 50-minute dinners, instructing footmen to move at speed and insisting on champagne throughout, rather than a different wine for each course. The innovation shocks traditionalists who consider the leisurely dinner, 3 to 4 hours of courses, conversation, and ceremony, essential to civilized life. Mrs. Astor's dinners famously last 4 hours. Alva Vanderbilt's can extend even longer. To compress this ritual into less than an hour seems almost violent, a rejection of everything dinner is meant to accomplish. Her reasoning, as she explains to puzzled guests, is practical. Other wines make people drowsy, and lengthy dinners bore everyone except the hosts. The champagne keeps energy high. The rapid service prevents tedium, and guests leave stimulated rather than stupefied. What she doesn't say, but what becomes clear through practice, is that speed also prevents the kind of formal hierarchies that develop during traditional dinners. When plates disappear before conversations can deepen into patronage or courtship, social power remains with the hostess who controls the tempo. The practical execution of these rapid dinners requires careful choreography. Footmen are drilled in precise timing. Courses must arrive at exact intervals. Plates removed the moment forks are set down. Wine glasses refilled without pause. The kitchen operates under military precision, with courses prepared in advance and held at proper temperatures. Any delay risks disrupting the entire sequence, turning innovation into chaos. Mamie oversees this machinery personally, timing each dinner with a small watch she consults discreetly between courses. Guests clutch plates to prevent their removal. Servants race on carpets muffled by thick underlay. Crystal rattles against porcelain in candlelight. At the head of the table, Mamie adjusts her gloves between courses, the small gesture at odds with the breakneck pace she has imposed on the meal. The gloves themselves, changed between courses on particularly formal occasions, become part of the performance. Pristine white kid for receiving guests, pale gray for dinner, black if in half mourning for a distant connection. The dining room's acoustics, carefully planned by White, carry conversation clearly without echo. Mamie uses this to her advantage, projecting her voice so that a witticism addressed to one guest becomes entertainment for all. The room becomes a stage where she directs not just service, but dialogue, orchestrating interactions that might lead to engagements, business partnerships, or useful alliances. She learns which guests shine under attention and which wilt, which topics will spark debate and which will kill conversation, which personalities will clash productively and which destructively. If Mrs. Astor used dinners to cement hierarchy, Mamie would use them to prove that she could make the same people laugh or squirm. In 1897, construction began on Crossways, the Fish's Newport cottage, designed by architect Dudley Newton on Ocean Avenue at Jeffrey Road. The location, slightly removed from the Bellevue Avenue concentration of palatial estates, offers both privacy and strategic positioning. Ocean Drive, while less densely built than Bellevue Avenue, provides spectacular coastal views and quick access to Newport's social centers. The decision to build on Ocean Drive, rather than Bellevue Avenue itself, signals independence. Mamie will not simply join the existing concentration of power, but establish her own center of gravity. Unlike the French and Italianate palaces rising along Bellevue Avenue, Crossways is a large white colonial revival house, 4 Corinthian columns supporting a classical portico, broad verandas wrapping around multiple sides, and an interior planned specifically for entertaining rather than family life. American aristocracy's architectural history notes that Mamie deliberately chose a distinctively American style, in contrast to houses like Marble House or the Elms, with their explicit references to European aristocratic architecture. The choice reflects both personal preference and strategic positioning. While Alva Vanderbilt and other hostesses import European grandeur, Mamie asserts a different kind of authority, rooted in American traditions, Republican rather than aristocratic, democratic in gesture, if not in substance. The colonial revival style, increasingly popular in the 1890s, appeals to Americans seeking to distinguish their culture from European models while still maintaining clear class distinctions. By choosing this style, Mamie positions herself as authentically American in a world increasingly dominated by European affectation. The architect Dudley Newton, while less famous than Richard Morris Hunt or Stanford White, brings specific expertise in colonial revival design. His Crossways creates a house that references 18th century American architecture while incorporating all modern conveniences: electricity, modern plumbing, central heating, and the latest kitchen technology. The exterior presents classical simplicity. The interior offers Gilded Age luxury. The combination allows Mamie to have it both ways: traditional appearance, modern comfort. By July 1898, the house was officially opened with a barn dance, itself a pointed statement about American informality. The dining room can seat 80, the drawing room holds 200. Somewhere in the plans, a later ballroom extension is already imagined. The scale of these public rooms, combined with relatively modest private quarters, reveals the building's true purpose. This is a machine for entertaining, every room calibrated for maximum social impact. The barn dance opening, documented in society columns, deliberately flouts Newport conventions. Guests arrive in informal dress, gingham and denim, rather than silk and satin. Music comes from a country fiddle band rather than a European orchestra. Dancing includes square dances and Virginia reels rather than waltzes and cotillions. Refreshments feature American fare: corn on the cob, barbecue, apple pie, instead of French cuisine. The event announces Mamie's intention to rewrite Newport's social script to prove that American forms can be as elegant and as exclusive as European ones. The grounds, landscaped with careful attention to both aesthetics and function, feature broad lawns for outdoor entertaining, gardens visible from the main entertaining spaces, and service buildings discreetly positioned to be invisible from public areas. Lights can be strung through trees for evening parties, tents erected on lawns for larger gatherings, and carriages accommodated along drives designed to create impressive approaches. The landscape architect has created what amounts to an outdoor ballroom, allowing Mamie to extend her entertaining into the open air during Newport's mild summers. Contemporary accounts of the opening celebration emphasize the novelty of a barn dance at a Newport cottage. Guests arrive uncertain what to expect, prepared to be scandalized or delighted, depending on temperament. Some find the informality refreshing, others consider it vulgar. All recognize it as a declaration of independence from Mrs. Astor's rigid protocols. From the start, Crossways is not simply a summer retreat. It is a laboratory in which Mamie will test how far she can bend the rituals of Newport society without breaking them. The next experiments will involve more than speeding up dinner. They will aim at the very pretensions the house was built to house. Newspaper pieces and later essays agree on one point: if an invitation arrived from Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish, you went, because she promised something besides dinner. The phrase itself becomes a selling point, appearing in society columns as both description and enticement. In an era of rigid social protocols where entertainment follows predictable patterns, the promise of novelty carries significant appeal. For younger members of society, particularly those bored by the endless repetition of Mrs. Astor's formal receptions, Mamie's unpredictability offers welcome relief. At Crossways around 1900, that something might be a Louis XIV masquerade, with guests in powdered wigs and brocade, the colonial facade lit by hundreds of fairy lamps, as recorded in a New York Times report of a 1912 ball. The fairy lamps, small colored glass lanterns containing candles or early electric bulbs, create a magical effect when strung through trees and along verandas. Their light, softer and more romantic than electric chandeliers, transforms the grounds into a stage set. Contemporary accounts describe approaching Crossways on such nights as entering a fairy tale: the house glowing against the dark ocean, music drifting across lawns, figures in elaborate costumes moving like apparitions through the gardens. The Louis XIV theme, chosen with deliberate irony for an American colonial house, requires guests to invest considerable time and money. Costumes must be researched and made by professional customers. Wigs must be powdered and styled. Jewelry and accessories must be authentic or convincing replicas. The investment signals both the guests' wealth and their willingness to humor Mamie's whims. Those who appear in inadequate costumes face her sharp tongue. Those who excel earn her praise and the envy of their peers. Or the entertainment might be a play satirizing the fashionable struggle for gentility, criticized in the press for its irreverence. One such production, performed by guests themselves, portrays thinly disguised versions of real society figures navigating social disasters. The wrong dress worn to an important dinner, a strategic marriage falling apart, a hostess's desperate attempts to secure titled Europeans for her guest list. The humor cuts close enough to reality that some attendees leave offended, which only increases the event's fame. The plays, written either by Mamie herself or by collaborators like Harry Lear, reveal sophisticated understanding of society's mechanisms. The jokes work on multiple levels: surface comedy for those who simply want, entertainment, sharper satire for those who recognize the specific targets, and a deeper critique of the entire system for those willing to see it. That some guests miss the satire and laugh at themselves without realizing it only enhances the joke for those in on the secret. Mamie breaks another custom. Instead of multiple wines, she serves only champagne, explaining that other wines make guests sleepy. The sound of corks, the clink of glasses, the shimmer of electric light on gilt mirrors, all are part of her new curriculum of amusement. The champagne itself, imported from France in quantities that shock even wealthy contemporaries, flows continuously through her parties. Footmen circulate with full bottles, refilling glasses before they empty, maintaining a level of intoxication that loosens tongues and inhibitions. The choice of champagne exclusively has practical benefits beyond preventing drowsiness. It simplifies service, eliminating the need for sommeliers to pair wines with courses. It democratizes drinking, as everyone receives the same beverage regardless of status, and it creates an atmosphere of celebration rather than solemnity. Champagne signals festivity, abundance, and a certain recklessness that suits Mamie's preferred mood. The parties develop a reputation, more lively than Mrs. Astor's formal receptions, more unpredictable than the Vanderbilts' displays of wealth, more genuinely entertaining than the musical evenings that the other hostesses favor. Young people particularly appreciate Mamie's events, finding in them relief from the stultifying formality that dominates most Newport gatherings. Older society figures react with more ambivalence. They attend because absence would signal irrelevance, but they whisper afterward about declining standards and inappropriate behavior. Amusement, however, can be a sharper form of social judgment than any formal snub. Numerous anecdotes survive, their exact dates sometimes blurred, but their tone consistent. At one luncheon, she supposedly invites 50 women, then refuses to appear, instructing servants to tell them she has changed her mind. The story, repeated in multiple sources with slight variations, may be apocryphal, but its persistence reveals something true about her reputation. She is understood as someone who might genuinely do such a thing, who considers social conventions negotiable and other people's expectations subject to her whim. The incident, if it occurred, would have created chaos. 50 women arriving in their finest day dress, expecting a fashionable luncheon, instead finding only confused servants and an absent hostess. The social implications would be severe. Is this deliberate insult? A practical joke? A sign of instability? The uncertainty itself becomes the punishment, leaving victims unsure how to respond. To complain publicly would invite ridicule. To accept silently would suggest weakness. Mamie's genius lies in creating situations where there is no good response. In another often repeated story, a young man remarks that he can never remember the name of her Newport house. Isn't it Crosspatch? And she replies, "Well, sweet pet, it's a patch you'll never cross." The retort, combining endearment with threat, exemplifies her style. The barb is delivered with a smile, making it impossible for the target to object without seeming humorless. The young man, excluded from future invitations, serves as an object lesson to others about the cost of carelessness with her. The sweet pet transforms what might be simple cruelty into something more complex. Maternal condescension mixed with absolute dismissal. The play on words, crossways to crosspatch, patch to cross, demonstrates her verbal dexterity. She doesn't simply insult, she performs, turning the exchange into theater for other listeners. Those present at such moments become both audience and chorus, their laughter ratifying her authority while warning them to guard their own tongues. The witticism circulates afterward, gaining embellishment with each retelling until it becomes part of Newport legend. Profiles from 1899 report that her friends say, Mamie Fish has a sharp tongue but a heart of gold. Her enemies believe she is a witch, yet everybody knows she is always ready to do or dare anything just for fun. The quote captures the ambivalence she inspires, admiration mixed with wariness, appreciation of her wit combined with fear of becoming its target. The reference to witchcraft, while obviously hyperbolic, suggests the quasi-magical power attributed to her social maneuvering. She can transform reputations, create or destroy marriages, elevate nobodies, and humiliate somebodies through means that seem to operate beyond ordinary causation. The heart of gold claim requires examination. Contemporary letters and later memoirs provide evidence of genuine kindness, anonymous charitable gifts, quiet assistance to families in distress, protection of young women facing social disasters. Yet this generosity operates selectively, extended to those who please her or who occupy positions too vulnerable to threaten her. The same woman who destroys a social climber with a quip will secretly pay a struggling family's medical bills. Perhaps the contradiction is strategic. Kindness that remains private creates grateful dependence. Cruelty that becomes public creates deterrent examples. These stories function like verbal calling cards. Each joke draws a line between those who enjoy the spectacle and those who feel its sting. Her wit operates as a sorting mechanism, separating the resilient from the sensitive, the insiders from those who take themselves too seriously. To laugh at her jokes, even when they cut close, signals sophistication. To object proves one's unsuitability for her circle. Other anecdotes emphasize her kindness alongside her cruelty, generous gifts to servants, quiet financial assistance to families in distress, unexpected acts of support for younger women navigating society's complexities. These stories, less widely circulated than the cutting remarks, suggest a more complex character than the witch label allows. She can devastate with a phrase, but she can also encourage, defend, and protect when she chooses. Her will, later published, includes substantial bequests to servants who served her for decades, suggesting relationships that transcended the purely transactional. When she devised the Prince del Drago dinner, she would turn that edge on the entire social order. In the summer of 1902, newspapers and gossip columns buzz about a rumored Prince del Drago visiting Newport. As Jennifer Wright's recent reconstruction shows, Mamie sends invitations from Crossways to anyone who was anyone, promising a grand dinner in his honor. The invitations themselves, engraved on heavy cream stock, mention the prince's Italian title and hint at his distinguished lineage. Recipients assume he is another of the European aristocrats who increasingly frequent Newport, seeking American heiresses or simply enjoying the lavish hospitality. The name Del Drago carries appropriate aristocratic resonance, vaguely Italian, suggesting ancient nobility, exotic enough to intrigue but familiar enough to seem plausible. The build-up to the event involves careful stage management. Mamie drops hints in conversations, the prince's distinguished lineage, his vast estates in Italy, his interest in American culture. She suggests that he might be seeking a bride, setting off competition among mothers with eligible daughters. The gossip networks that normally police society now serve her purposes, spreading rumors and building anticipation. By the time invitations arrive, demand for attendance has reached fever pitch. Guests arrive in satin and diamonds, rehearsing curtsies for a European nobleman. The women wear their finest Paris gowns, the men their most formal evening dress. Jewels that usually remain in vaults make appearances. diamond tiaras, emerald necklaces, pearl chokers worth small fortunes. The competition for the prince's attention begins before he even appears, with mothers positioning eligible daughters and hostesses planning future invitations that might secure his attendance at their own events. The preparation extends beyond dress. Mothers coach daughters in Italian phrases, review European etiquette, and rehearse appropriate topics for conversation with nobility. Young women practice curtsies to the proper depth for addressing a prince, memorize the correct forms of address, and prepare witty remarks that might capture his attention. The effort expended represents substantial investment of time, money, and emotional energy, all based on Mamie's carefully planted suggestions. In the ballroom's electric glow, the orchestra tunes, champagne glasses chime softly. The house is decorated even more elaborately than usual. Roses everywhere, fairy lamps glowing in the gardens, footmen in formal livery standing at attention. The atmosphere combines anticipation and anxiety. Will the prince notice me? Will I commit some faux pas? What opportunities might this evening create? Conversation buzzes with speculation. Which family will the prince favor? What alliances might form? How should one address Italian royalty? When Chicago millionaire Joseph Leader finally appears holding the prince, he is, quite literally, holding him in his hand. A monkey in a tiny tuxedo, later remembered as Jocko. The moment of revelation, Leader ascending the stairs, the monkey perched on his shoulder or cradled in his arms, Mamie watching from the side as recognition dawns across the assembled faces, becomes legendary. Some guests laugh immediately, understanding and appreciating the joke. Others stand frozen, uncertain how to respond. A few, reportedly, turn and leave in fury, their expensive preparations wasted on a prank. The monkey himself, dressed in perfect miniature evening clothes, complete with white tie and tails, becomes the evening's sensation. Whether he comprehends his role is unclear, but he performs it perfectly, sitting quietly during introductions, accepting treats from guests, occasionally making sounds that seem almost conversational. His very presence transforms the evening from social event to theatrical performance, with everyone suddenly uncertain whether they are audience or actors. Reports claim that after initial shock, diners accepted Jocko with good grace, some even declaring it the most entertaining night of their lives. The monkey, trained to sit at a table and mimic eating behaviors, becomes the center of attention. Guests pose for photographs with him, feed him delicacies, and treat the whole affair as elaborate theater. Champagne helps. By the time dinner begins, enough glasses have been consumed that even the initially offended find themselves laughing. The mood shifts from mortification to hilarity as guests realize that everyone has been equally fooled. Critics, however, argue that such antics make New York society appear undignified abroad, confirming European stereotypes about American vulgarity and lack of refinement. The prank revealed what Mamie had already guessed, that high society feared ridicule almost as much as exclusion. The Monkey Prince is only one in a sequence of theatrical evenings. Architectural and social histories of Crossways record a dog's dinner for more than 100 canine guests, animal costume balls, and a Louis the Roti masquerade mentioned in the New York Times. The dog's dinner, perhaps even more notorious than the Monkey Prince incident, involves actual dogs seated at miniature tables, served special meals on china plates while their owners watch from the gallery. The event raises questions about taste and boundaries. Is it charming or absurd? Innovative or degrading? The logistics of the dog's dinner require elaborate planning. Custom tables must be built at appropriate height for dogs of varying sizes. Menus must be designed that are both appealing to canine palates and safe for consumption. Servants must be trained to serve animals rather than humans. The potential for chaos, fighting between dogs, messes on expensive carpets, pandemonium as animals react to proximity to competitors, requires careful management. That Mamie pulls it off successfully demonstrates organizational abilities rarely acknowledged in discussions of her entertainment. The dogs, brought by their society owners, vary from lapdogs to hunting breeds, each carefully groomed and some dressed in small costumes. Servants serve specially prepared meals, chopped meat, bone broth, liver pate, on expensive china. The spectacle of thoroughbred dogs dining from Sèvres porcelain while servants attend them parodies the very society that makes such events possible. Some guests find it delightful, others consider it wasteful or sacrilegious. The divide often runs along generational lines. Younger people see innovation and humor. Older people see declining standards and inappropriate frivolity. Hogan Associates' Newport essay notes parties where guests dressed as animals, and an occasion when Harry Houdini performed magic at Crossways. Houdini, already famous for his escape acts and illusions, performs in the ballroom, transforming the space into a temporary theater. His presence signals Mamie's willingness to blur boundaries between society and entertainment, between the exclusive world of Newport and the more democratic realm of popular performance. To invite a professional entertainer into a private home breaks traditional distinctions between classes and suggests that performance value matters more than social pedigree. Houdini's act at Crossways reportedly includes his famous handcuff escapes, straitjacket escapes, and possibly water tank escapes, if the ballroom could accommodate the equipment. Contemporary accounts describe guests gathering close to watch, the usual social hierarchies temporarily suspended as everyone strains to see the magician's techniques. The performance creates a different kind of social leveling. For the duration of the act, everyone is equally spellbound, equally positioned as audience rather than actors in their own social drama. Her collaborator in such schemes is often Harry Lair, a clever socialite with a taste for mischief. Lair, who makes his career by entertaining wealthy women despite his own lack of fortune, shares Mamie's appetite for pranks and her disregard for stuffier society conventions. Their partnership produces some of Newport's most memorable events: costume balls where judges award prizes for creativity, theatrical productions satirizing society figures, elaborate practical jokes that leave victims unsure whether to laugh or take offense. Lair's relationship with Mamie is mutually beneficial. He provides ideas, energy, and companionship. She provides venue, resources, and social protection. Some whisper about the nature of their friendship, particularly given Lair's apparent lack of romantic interest in women, but Mamie seems indifferent to gossip. She values his contributions and his loyalty, and in return provides him access to society that his own background could never secure. In photographs from this period, Mamie appears in elaborate hats and furs, her expression almost bored amid the spectacle. The boredom may be affected, a pose suggesting that even the most extravagant entertainment barely engages her. Or it may be genuine, revealing that the constant invention of novelty has become exhausting rather than exhilarating. Between entrances, she can be seen tugging her gloves into place, the familiar gesture now part of a stage costume. Beneath the jokes, these entertainments underline a more serious point. She is no passive consort to a railroad president, but an architect of a new social style, positioning herself as the alternative to Astorian solemnity. Yet the freedom to mock depended on a security that could vanish, as she well knew from childhood. Modern commentators underline the paradox of Mamie's position. As one essayist notes, she can't really have a job. It would not be respectable for her to work for money. She can't enter politics. Her domain is limited to drawing rooms and ballrooms, her tools, invitations, and jokes. The observation, while obvious, deserves emphasis. For all her power within her sphere, that sphere remains narrow and its authority fragile. A woman of her intelligence and organizational ability, born a generation later or into different circumstances, might have run corporations or led political movements. Instead, she channels these capacities into entertaining. The constraints are both legal and social. She cannot vote, cannot hold office, cannot engage in business under her own name. Her wealth is her husband's wealth. Her house is legally his property. Even her children belong more to him in law than to her. The social power she wields, the ability to make or break reputations through inclusion or exclusion, operates entirely through informal channels and depends on continued access to her husband's fortune and position. Should Stuyvesant choose to limit her spending or restrict her entertainment, she would have no legal recourse. Yet within these constraints, she has built something remarkable, a parallel power structure that rivals formal institutions in its influence over certain lives. To secure an invitation to her events can mean more to ambitious families than securing a business deal. To earn her favor can open doors that remain closed to those with greater wealth but less social polish. She has transformed the limitations of her role into a kind of authority, using the tools available to her with extraordinary effectiveness. At Glencliff, the Fishes' country estate on the Hudson, inherited from Hamilton Fish in 1893, she expands the house to 15 bedrooms and hosts Halloween balls and weekend house parties. The estate, located in Garrison, New York, overlooks the Hudson River from elevated grounds, offering both natural beauty and convenient access to New York City. The expansion transforms it from a comfortable country house into another stage for entertaining, capable of accommodating dozens of overnight guests for extended weekends. The Halloween balls at Glencliff become annual traditions, with guests arriving in costume and the house decorated with autumn leaves, pumpkins, and dramatic lighting effects. Contemporary accounts describe elaborate treasure hunts through the grounds, ghost stories told around fires, and costume competitions with prizes. The informality of the setting, country house rather than Newport Palace, allows for more relaxed behavior than would be acceptable in more formal venues. Local accounts remember her pink bedroom and constant stream of guests. The bedroom, decorated entirely in shades of pink from pale blush to deep rose, becomes famous enough to merit description in society columns. Pink silk wallpaper, pink velvet upholstery, pink marble in the adjoining bathroom. The total environment announces her taste, while also creating a deliberately feminine retreat from the more formal entertaining spaces. The choice of pink, traditionally associated with femininity and romance, seems almost ironic coming from a woman known for sharp wit and caustic humor. But control has its price: schedules to create, menus to approve, causes to support. The work of organizing these entertainments, while invisible to guests who experience only the finished product, consumes enormous time and energy. She must coordinate with caterers, florists, musicians, servants, must plan themes and costumes, must craft guest lists that balance social obligations with personal preferences, must prepare herself, the right dress, the right jewels, the right mood, for each performance. The constant demand for novelty creates pressure. Each event must surpass the last, each joke must be sharper, each entertainment more memorable. Obituaries later record her generous donations to the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and New York missions. The same woman who could humiliate a latecomer with a remark also quietly endowed charities and remembered servants in her will. The charitable work, rarely publicized during her lifetime, suggests conscience alongside the caustic wit, perhaps even recognition that her privilege rests on inequalities she cannot personally remedy, but can at least slightly ameliorate. As the new century advanced, the question became whether caustic wit and perfect gloves were still sufficient armor against age and change. From 1909 to 1912, the Fishes traveled extensively in Europe and along the Nile, prompting rumors that Crossways may be sold. The travels, documented in society columns and steamship passenger lists, take them to Egypt, Italy, France, and England. Speculation about selling Crossways suggests either financial pressure or waning interest in Newport's social scene, or simply the natural result of absence creating uncertainty. The extended absences break the rhythm of Newport seasons, creating space for other hostesses to claim attention and authority. The Egyptian journey, particularly fashionable among wealthy Americans in this period, involves weeks traveling up the Nile, visiting archaeological sites, and experiencing the exotic Orient as filtered through luxury hotels and guided tours. Photographs from the journey show Mamie pose before pyramids and temples, her elaborate travel costume suggesting that even in remote locations, proper dress and presentation matter. The travel diaries kept by contemporaries on similar journeys describe the strange combination of hardship and luxury, primitive conditions alternating with palatial hotels, authentic encounters with foreign culture mediated through translators and guides. American aristocracy notes how, on their return, She quashes the speculation with a large July dinner for 80, the largest of the season, the house illuminated, roses climbing the walls, fairy lamps along the drives. The dinner reasserts her presence and authority, demonstrating that reports of her social decline are premature. The menu, the decorations, the carefully selected guest list all signal that Mamie Fish remains a force in Newport society. The effort required to stage such an event after extended absence suggests determination to maintain position despite the inevitable erosions of time. Yet the world beyond those lamps is shifting. Income taxes, reform politics, and changing attitudes toward wealth begin to erode the authority of the 400. The 16th Amendment, ratified in 1913, establishes federal income tax, fundamentally altering the economics of maintaining multiple estates. What once seemed an unassailable fortune now faces annual assessments that make the cost of lavish entertaining more visible and more painful. Families that previously spent without calculation must now consider whether each ball, each costume, each imported delicacy justifies its tax implications. Reform politics, including progressive-era campaigns against inequality and corruption, increasingly question the legitimacy of concentrated wealth. The same newspapers that once breathlessly reported society events now run exposés about working conditions in industries that make such wealth possible. The railroads that fund the Fish's lifestyle face strikes, regulation, and public criticism. Journalists and reformers increasingly frame the extravagance of Newport and Fifth Avenue as evidence of systemic injustice rather than admirable achievement. The cultural shift extends beyond politics. Motion pictures, increasingly popular, introduce new forms of entertainment that don't require social connections or expensive dress. Automobiles allow greater mobility, enabling people to create their own amusements rather than waiting for invitations. The telephone begins to replace calling cards, democratizing communication in ways that erode traditional protocols. Even fashion changes, simpler lines, less restrictive corsets, shorter hemlines, all suggesting a generation less willing to accept physical discomfort for the sake of appearance. Younger people, including some of Mamie's own children, look toward new amusements, new circles. The younger generation finds jazz more exciting than waltzes, speakeasies more appealing than formal balls, and the informality of modern life more authentic than the elaborate protocols their parents maintain. The gap between generations, always present, widens into a gulf. Mamie's jokes, once shocking, now seem tame compared to the genuine rebellion of youth embracing radical politics, sexual freedom, and artistic experimentation. At Glencliff, she continues to host Halloween parties. In New York, she still presides over sharp-tongued dinners. But the jokes land differently as the war clouds gather over Europe. What was once charming irreverence starts to feel, to some observers, like the last performance of an era. When World War I began in 1914, the frivolity that characterized Gilded Age society became increasingly difficult to sustain. How can one host costume balls when young men are dying in trenches? How can one justify elaborate dinners when European civilians face starvation? The gloves, however, were still immaculate, right up to the spring morning when she would no longer put them on herself. On 25 May 1915, Mamie died suddenly of cerebral hemorrhage at Glencliff, the Hudson River estate in Garrison, New York. Her New York Times obituary calls her a leader of society and recalls Mother Goose and flower balls as features of Newport, also noting her generous charitable giving. The obituary, like most such notices, emphasizes public achievements while remaining silent about private struggles or personal costs. The formal language, prominent society figure, noted hostess, generous benefactor, converts a complex life into acceptable categories, erasing ambiguities and contradictions in favor of memorial simplicity. The cerebral hemorrhage, occurring without warning, offers no opportunity for farewells or final arrangements. She is found in her pink bedroom, the space that represented her most personal retreat, having died quickly and apparently without suffering. The suddenness shocks even those who knew her best, though some later suggest that her intense social schedule and constant entertaining had taken a physical toll. The relentless performance, the perpetual invention of novelty, the endless management of social dynamics. Perhaps these demands exact prices not visible until the system collapses. Contemporary medical understanding of cerebral hemorrhage remains limited. The condition can strike without warning, offering little opportunity for prevention or treatment. Whether Mamie experienced symptoms she ignored or whether the hemorrhage truly came without warning, no record indicates. The only certainty is the sudden transition from life to death, from presence to absence, from hostess to memory. She is buried nearby at the Church of St. Philip in the Highlands, a small Episcopal church overlooking the Hudson. The funeral, well attended but relatively modest by Gilded Age standards, reflects both the wartime atmosphere and perhaps a recognition that the era of spectacular display has passed. Stuyvesant, devastated by the loss, arranges for a simple marker rather than an elaborate monument. The simplicity may reflect his grief or changing sensibilities about ostentatious memorial. Either way, it contrasts sharply with the elaborate monuments favored in earlier decades. The church itself, built in 1868 in the Gothic Revival style, serves a small congregation of local families and summer residents. Its cemetery occupies a hillside with views across the Hudson to the Catskill Mountains beyond. The location offers beauty and tranquility, a final resting place far removed from the ballrooms and drawing rooms where Mamie exercised her authority. Stuyvesant lived on until 1923, his estate leaving fortunes to their 3 surviving children. His later years, marked by declining health and increasing isolation, lacked the vivacity that Mamie brought to their partnership. The Illinois Central Railroad, facing new competition and regulation, no longer offers the unchallenged dominance it enjoyed during their marriage. The world has changed, and Stuyvesant seems uncertain how to navigate it without her. Letters from this period, preserved in family archives, suggest loneliness and disorientation, the loss of a partner who had managed so much of their social life, leaving him adrift. Crossways was eventually sold to Ella Morris de Peyster and later subdivided. Today, its white facade still faces Ocean Drive, no longer a single-family stage, but a private residence complex. The transformation mirrors the fate of many Newport cottages. Too large for modern families, too expensive to maintain as single residences, they survive through division or institutional use. The ballroom where monkeys dined and society laughed still exists, though now partitioned into apartments. The ghosts of those evenings, if ghosts exist, must navigate walls that now divide what was once seamless space. The New York mansion at 25 East 78th Street survives as a landmarked reminder of Gilded Age Fifth Avenue. Designated a landmark in the 1970s, it stands among other preserved mansions from the same era, their facades maintained while their interiors serve new purposes: consulates, institutions, occasionally private residences for those who can afford such scale. Stanford White's design remains intact, though the rooms now host functions he never imagined: diplomatic receptions, institutional meetings, modern life. Conducted in spaces designed for a vanished world. At the Desmond Fish Library in Garrison and in Newport Histories, she appears now as both caricature and case study, a fun maker whose caustic wit masked the narrowness of the role available to her. Scholars debate her significance. Was she a proto-feminist using the only tools available to assert power in a patriarchal system, or simply a wealthy woman amusing herself at others' expense? Perhaps both interpretations contain truth. Perhaps the question itself imposes modern categories on a life that resists such simplification. What remains most vivid is not a specific joke, but the image of a woman pulling on her gloves before stepping out to rearrange the social order for one more evening. In a display case at a local historical exhibition, a single calling card reads in spare black script, "Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish." Nearby, a photograph shows her in plumes and furs, hand half raised as if about to adjust the edge of her glove. The photograph, taken sometime in the 1890s by a society photographer whose name has not survived, captures her at the height of her powers, eyes intelligent and assessing, mouth set in an expression that might become smile or sneer depending on circumstances. Posture, perfect despite the weight of elaborate costume. The card is small, cream stock, slightly yellowed, edges softened by handling. It once opened doors, silenced rooms, thrilled or unnerved recipients who understood exactly what such a name could do to their standing. Now it lies still under museum glass, reflecting the overhead lights instead of ballroom chandeliers. The engraving remains crisp despite age, formal script announcing identity through husband's name, no given name necessary because there was only one Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish who mattered. The card represents a technology of social power now obsolete. Contemporary visitors to the exhibition, if they notice it at all, must read explanatory text to understand its significance. The protocols of calling cards, when to leave them, how many to leave, what their presence or absence signified, have vanished so completely that they require anthropological explanation. The card's power has dissolved with the system that gave it meaning. No voice repeats the old barbs. No orchestra waits for her nod. Yet in the curve of the letters and the faint shadow of ink, the architecture of a vanished world of power, performance, and carefully gloved rebellion remains, elegant and unsettling in equal measure. The card and photograph together pose questions the exhibition cannot answer. What did it feel like to wield such power? What did it cost to maintain such performance? Was the woman in the photograph a prisoner or architect of the system she manipulated? The gloves in the photograph appear pristine, the kid leather smooth against her skin. But somewhere, perhaps, a pair of those actual gloves survives. In a trunk, in a museum storage facility, in a descendant's attic. If found, they would show the creases where fingers bent, the slight wearing at the wrist where fabric rubbed against skin, the faint stains that no cleaning could completely remove, the material evidence of constraint and performance, of ritual and cost, preserved in kid leather and silk.